Good morning. My name is Brandy, and I will be your conference operator today. At this time, I would like to welcome everyone to the Regulatory Compliance Considerations when Moving to the Cloud webcast. All lines have been placed on mute to prevent any background noise. After the speaker's remarks, there will be a question and answer session. If you would like to ask a question during this time, simply press star, then the number 1 on your telephone keypad. If you would like to withdraw your question, press the pound key. Thank you. Mr. Ted Sherrill, you may begin your conference.
Brandy. So welcome, everyone, to our webcast. As it says here, we're talking about regulatory compliance. And as customers are moving some of their databases, whether they be data warehouses, data marts, or applications to the cloud, they have questions about, how do we ensure that we're maintaining the level of security remediation and, even more importantly, hitting our regulatory compliance requirements in doing that. Because clearly the controls that you have on premises, some of those will stay intact when you move to the cloud, but then the cloud offers a different environment, especially around the edge, et cetera, that you'll need to take into consideration. So again, this webcast is going to try to help you answer that question as to how do I assess my current on-premise environment, and then if moving to the cloud, how do I identify potential gaps or compensating controls, et cetera, that the cloud environment would offer. And so we're going to start today with I'm going to review how you would go about assessing your on-premise environment. And then we have a partner, Curtis Johnson from RISC Watch, who's going to show how you could take that information and then compare it to the cloud controls that are offered so you can identify potential gaps or compensating controls, take into account cost considerations and other factors that would, be a part of that decision in moving to the cloud. So that's what we're going to cover today. So again, as we all know, the regulatory landscape is changing very quickly. We had a lot of new privacy regulations like the European Union's GDPR, now the pending California Consumer Privacy Act, et cetera. And then, I think the average statistic is the average corporation's application is subject to about 13 different regulations. So you have to obviously work to comply with those, which you've been doing on-premise for a good while. And that being said, you need to understand what your data is. So again, understanding what sensitive data maybe you have within your Oracle databases and where that information resides is key. And so, when you go about doing an assessment, some of the first questions we hear from customers is, I'm not for sure what sensitive data I have within the database, and I'm not even for sure where that resides within the database itself, whether, which tables, columns, et cetera. So, Oracle is going to help you answer that question, and we have a complementary tool, if you will, called DVSOT that will do exactly this. And you can download it from Oracle support, and I'll have the link here in the presentation to show you where you can download the DVSOT tool that will help you, answer these questions. So again, where does my sensitive data reside? Along with that, what are the controls that I'm using to protect that sensitive data within the database? And if you, by the way, our DVSOT tool, if you are running an Oracle application like Oracle E-Business Suite or PeopleSoft, et cetera, it will highlight some of those controls for you as well. So it's, very helpful in helping you fill out what your control assessment is. So again, what is the DVSOT tool? It's short. It's an acronym for Database Security Assessment Tool. What is it? What does it do for you? Well, it understands what sensitive data resides in your database and where it resides. It also looks at what users, entitlements, and risk are and controls you have within that environment. And again, it can discover sensitive data in multiple languages, as you see. It provides actionable assessment reports, and this is actually where Curtis is going to take it and take the report that's generated and show how you can use RiskWatch to do a comparison for cloud environments, such as if you're moving to the Oracle Cloud or if you want to move to AWS or Azure, et cetera. You can look at the controls that those clouds offer and do a comparison. And again, this is complementary to Oracle customers, and it can be downloaded from Oracle support. So what does the DVSOT tool check for? It checks for security configurations. Again, it's looking to see, what is the sensitive data that you have. Currently, we have over 125 pattern algorithms to look for data. You can adjust those, modify them, or add to it as needed to do the scanning of the data. It also looks to see what are the controls around within the database. Do you have data encryption turned on? If so, for what data elements, what strength level, 128 or 256, et cetera, what auditing policies you have, what's the fine-grained access control, all the way down to like operating system file permissions, what patches and when were they last applied to the environment. And again, looking at users and entitlements, what accounts are set up with what privileges and roles, what access to data do they have. Again, that's very critical when we're talking about privacy regulations such as the GDPR. And then, and again, we talked about the sensitive data. So it helps you do your data classification so that you can understand what are the controls you need in place. So again, let's look at the assessment flow normal for data privacy. You want to discover what is the sensitive data, and we've talked about that. The DVSOT tool will do that. You want to look at what's the overall security configuration and controls that exist within that environment. And then it generates reports, and then you're going to implement security controls or tuning to accommodate that. But more importantly here, you're going to utilize the RiskWatch tool to compare it to controls within the cloud environment, so that you would know that if I move that up into the cloud, what are my potential gaps or compensating controls for that specific environment. So again, just real quickly, what sensitive data do we have? This gives you an idea. We talked about the pattern recognitions it looks for within your database, so this helps pull that information back. You can see how many tables and columns, et cetera, it has. One interesting thing of note is it's important to run these for our applications like eBusiness Suite and PeopleSoft. Out on Oracle support, you can download, like for EBS and PeopleSoft, you can download a spreadsheet that shows where the sensitive data is, both within the tables of the database as well as what forms it's displayed on within the application. But understand it's still important to run the DVSOT tool, because a lot of personnel will mistakenly input, especially in the past before these new privacy regulations took place. We would see in the free-form text fields within the applications, people would input country ID or social security numbers, all kinds of personal information, phone numbers, contact information, et cetera, that today would not be advisable to be put in there. So again, the DVSOT tool will scan it and capture that information that's being put in those free-form text fields as well. So again, which tables have sensitive data? This gives you an idea as to, so you can actually see the actual tables, and all the way down to the column level here. So we can see what is the table, the column name, et cetera. And again, it just helps you identify where is your sensitive data. Why this is important is because you may need to be able to identify if those columns or tables are encrypted and what other controls like auditing, et cetera, that you have set up on those sensitive data elements. So that's why it's important to know where it exists. Once it's identified all that, again, it can generate a report that shows you the anatomy of the finding, if you will. So it looks at the controls you have in place, and then it will do an assessment to say what is the status, and here you can see that it's classified it as a potential high-risk element, and it gives you the details, the remarks, and if you look down at the bottom for the references, it maps this over to a lot of the security frameworks, such as the STIG environments, NIST, ISO, et cetera. So this does a really good job of helping you map these findings, if you will, over to the specific regulations. And that's key because Curtis is going to be highlighting this a little bit later as to when we walk through the tool to look for the comparison to the cloud. So again, it's also looking at the configurations and basically giving you a report here as to areas that you might want to look into, because obviously one of the things customers are looking to do is maybe if this environment's moving up to the cloud, even though you've got potential evaluation and advisory or high-risk items here, maybe when it moves to the cloud, those may be taken care of. And that's a really important point to note. You might not have to fix it on-premise. By moving it to the cloud, those very well may be remediated. And again, looking at the entitlements, et cetera, and of course this is very important. We've all heard about the AWS S3 breaches due to granting access to local, et cetera. So it's important to understand what are the privileges with, that are set up within the database. And again, who do you have DBA roles granted to? I was just reading in the just released this week the Verizon security report, and stolen credentials is the second most utilized method for hacking systems. So it's very important to know, and privileged users is one of the primary candidates for those stolen credentials, as you would imagine. So it's important to understand who are these privileged users or roles, who are the users they're granted to, are those shared credentials, et cetera. And again, it produces the report in multiple formats, and that you can see here. And again, the nice thing about this, for instance, like with the spreadsheet that Curtis is going to show, is you can take that information and then use it to upload into the RiskWatch system to do the comparison between on-premise and the cloud. And lastly, again, for the DVSOT tool, again, this is a complementary tool that you have that will assess your existing on-premise environment, and in doing so, it will you can look at that environment, and now you're coupled with what RiskWatch is going to offer. You can compare it to what the cloud environment will offer. And again, if there were findings for the on-premise, maybe instead of mitigating those today, maybe when you move it to the cloud, those may be remediated or through additional controls, et cetera. And that's what we'll look at. So I'm going to turn it over to Curtis now with RiskWatch, and we've done the evaluation with the DVSOT tool of the on-premise Oracle environment, and now Curtis is going to show you how you can take those results that we just talked about and use them to identify how those will look and compare within a specific cloud environment.
All right, thank you, Ted. If you would please go to the next slide. Perfect. So I will be doing a live demonstration of our CyberWatch platform. what I'll be covering is first importing that data from the DVSOT Report export and how we can upload that into the CyberWatch platform to be able to capture all of the information that needs to be assessed or compared to the assessment that's in the CyberWatch platform. We will be basing the assessment on the NIST Cybersecurity framework, so it's important to understand that that export of the DVSOT tool can be exported to NIST Cybersecurity framework to directly map with the assessment that would be in CyberWatch of the Oracle Cloud. I'll talk about performing the assessment of the Oracle Cloud against any of those additional controls, how you can analyze that data within the CyberWatch platform, looking at any of the recommendations or mitigation options that you might have in addressing those controls that will get you to the cloud, then comparing that DVSOT report to the report that would come out of our CyberWatch platform of the Oracle Cloud, and then how you can get started doing that assessment. So Ted, if you'd pass me the ball, I'll start presenting the CyberWatch platform. All right. So we would start with, first off, the DVSOT report. So this is a sample report from the DVSOT tool. This gives you a good idea of what you could expect in that report to see the results of that assessment. Again, it can be exported in that NIST Cybersecurity Framework format, so it maps to those controls. We can see the specific issues here, and let's say that these are not being addressed as part of that framework, and we need to include them in our assessment. The NIST Cybersecurity Framework will be in the CyberWatch platform, so you won't need to copy any of that information into the platform, as we would be comparing that by default at completion of an assessment in CyberWatch. So anything outside of those NIST Cybersecurity Framework controls that were addressed in the DVSOT tool, we would simply take that information and copy it from that report and then upload it into a template that we could generate from the CyberWatch platform, where we would just copy and paste the information from the DVSOT tool into it and then upload that information back into the CyberWatch platform just by choosing and uploading that file. And that would create those additional controls that we would need to address within our assessment to create the full picture of what we have on-prem, the controls that are there, the things that we need to evaluate in that on-prem environment versus the cloud environment that we're assessing. So to perform an assessment of the Oracle Cloud, if we have included additional information as part of that upload, we would need to create a new assessment to capture that information. In the event that we do not need to enter that information, we would already have the Oracle Cloud assessment performed in the platform, so we would not need to recreate a new assessment to capture the additional information. So I will create a new assessment today just to create the full picture of what it of how you would use the platform to do an assessment. In the event that I'm doing the assessment myself, I can identify the assessment that I need to do and associate myself with that. In the event that I'm sending it to someone else, I can identify a contact for that Oracle Cloud scope and associate that individual with that scope where I need to gather that information. So I do have the ability to involve others in this assessment. After I input what it is or who I would like to involve in the assessment, I would simply create that assessment, and the platform will automatically communicate with those individuals and let them know that I've invited them to participate in the assessment and that we can begin completing it. So in the event that I am performing the assessment myself, you would have an assessment that is completed of the Oracle Cloud that you would be able to select and start capturing the additional information that would be required to assess your on-prem environment against this cloud environment. So we're using the NIST Cybersecurity framework in this assessment. So what that means is that the criteria that we're going through in the assessment has been associated with the controls in that NIST cybersecurity framework. So we can see how that control is being met in the Oracle Cloud. We can see what additional information has been uploaded into the platform to support that specific control requirement. So we can see for this control here how physical devices and systems are inventoried within the organization. We can view the attachments that speak to that specific requirement. I can download and open up that specific document and identify within it how that requirement is being met. So this will point you more specifically to the information of how that control is being met and any additional information that you should be aware of and how exactly that control is being met in the Oracle Cloud. In addition to the control information associated with that NIST control in the platform, you will have recommendations that have been associated with that control. In the event that you do need to mitigate something, you have a mitigation path there already. So in the event that you are reviewing the assessment or doing the assessment yourself, this is the process that you would go through to either capture the additional information that would be gathered outside of NIST or information within the assessment that you would need to review and make more specific to the app that you are taking to the cloud. Now, if you sent it to someone else, you can't easily review the information that's come back from that assessment by just doing survey analysis. And this analysis will allow us to filter the information that we've gathered based on the information that was actually collected by specific sections of NIST that we want to look at or vulnerabilities that be identified. So for any of the information that was gathered in the system, I can easily look at the comments that were provided and download those attachments that were uploaded into that control requirement. In the event that I do need to take some action around this control, I can offer a recommendation to say exactly how we would fix this in our environment. There are default recommendations that are provided in guidance with the NIST cybersecurity framework. So if you were following that framework and what you needed to do was in line with that control framework, you would not need to do this, but you could. So now that we've gone through and identified what we have in our on-prem environment versus the cloud environment, now we can start to understand where the controls are matching up versus that DVSOT report versus the CyberWatch assessment report. So that can easily be done on the dashboard and a more interactive analysis of this information just by selecting the assessments that you want to look at information for and then drilling down into that data. So here I can call up the assessments that have been performed in the platform, and I can drill down into overall how we're meeting compliance within the NIST cybersecurity framework and anything else that I've addressed in that assessment. So I can select all of that information and easily look at it here and understand how we are or are not meeting those control requirements. So here I can see these areas protect identify, respond. So if I wanted to further drill down into those areas, I can grab the specific sets of questions that I want to look at more granularly and look at that information within the dashboard, click into those controls, see how they're being met, all the additional information that was included for them. So again, more interaction here within the dashboard, especially if you wanted to do something coming out of this analysis, like create a recommendation or assign a task. This would be a more managed approach to taking action on anything found in assessments. Several reports can be downloaded from the system as well. Since we are comparing our cloud assessment directly to the information that was gathered in the on-prem assessment, I'll cover two reports that would be best for doing that comparison. So the first report will be our assessment summary report, which you can generate here for the scope that you've assessed. So when you select that report, the system will start to build that report for you. So this is more of an executive style report that covers overall what the assessment looks like, compliance, scoring, how many issues were identified in the cloud environment, whether or not we have a recommendation to resolve that issue, and the cost of implementing those recommendations in the event there is a cost associated. So if you are assigning those activities out, you can see here how the platform will track those activities as well, not only within the platform and dashboards, but also the reports coming out of the system. It makes the process of moving to the cloud more efficient. So this is an executive summary of the data. As we scroll through this report, it'll just keep breaking down this information. So here we're seeing overall compliance or the top non-compliant areas. So these would be areas that within the NIST cybersecurity framework, again, since we're using that framework as the baseline of what we're doing in this assessment, we can see those controls that would be posed as non-compliant with that framework. So in the event that you are adding additional controls from the DVSOT tool and you have non-compliance in those categories, the platform is customizable. These charts and graphs would update based on that information that was collected. So as we scroll through the report, we can see more specifically the risk rating with the gaps or the controls that were identified in the NIST Cybersecurity Framework assessment of the cloud environment. So here we're seeing within Identify Asset Management as an example that this control is not being met currently, and it is a high risk. And we're seeing what recommendation was offered based on that control. So here's the NIST Cybersecurity Framework control right here, and the recommendation that's being made in this scenario. So for every control that we address, we do have a rating for that control. We can see whether the risk is high or medium or low. So this makes, again, comparison back with that DVSOT report very efficient because you can match these scorings and these ratings together, especially if you're using that NIST Cybersecurity Framework export out of the DVSOT tool. These two reports will match up very nicely. So if you would prefer more of a spreadsheet export of data from the platform, you can generate what we call a response analysis report, which will break down all of the information collected in the assessment. So looking at an example of that information coming out of the platform, you can see by the category that's addressed, what question was asked, and the response that was provided, and that specific control that was being met. So again, here's another way that you can easily map the information coming out of that cloud assessment to the information that would be gathered in the DVSOT tool. So in summary, CyberWatch can be used to assess and compare the best cloud environment for migrating those on-prem apps. So looking at survey analysis here. Again, very, very easy way to filter and see what controls are being met, which controls are not being met, what you should do to fix those. Completing the assessment will identify the controls that are needed in the cloud versus your on-prem environment. So in the event a control is being met inherently by the cloud and no longer needed in the on-prem environment, you have those cost advantages. Those can be identified here. In addition to controls that might need to be tuned or implemented in order to move to the cloud. With the recommendations that are offered in the assessment, again, you can turn those into tasks. So in the event that we have a recommendation that's relevant, that you want to implement, that is a good fit for that control, you can simply turn that activity into a task and track that through to completion and assist you in moving to the cloud. So looking at using the platform, you can easily start doing an assessment against the Oracle Cloud in our platform by simply going to our website and verifying your email address and requesting a trial of CyberWatch with the Oracle Cloud Assessment, which will be an option in this dropdown, and get instant access to the platform to be able to use it for assessments. So that completes the live demo of the CyberWatch platform. I'd like to turn it back over to Ted Sherrill now from Oracle and understand if there's any additional comments, remarks, questions we should take for the call.
Yeah, thank you, Curtis. So, again, to summarize what you saw, from the demo and what I covered, Oracle has a complementary tool called the Database Security Assessment Tool that you can download from Oracle support that will help you assess your on-premise Oracle environment, whether it's an application instance, data mart, data warehouse, etc. And again, it will scan for what sensitive data you have, help you do the data classification, and then highlight what are the configurations, controls, etc. that you currently have in place for that environment. Once you have done that, then you can, again, take that information, load it up into RiskWatch for your on-prem environment, compare that to the seeded data within RiskWatch for the Oracle Cloud to help you understand what are the additional remediations you'll benefit from within the cloud, the compensating controls, etc. And that's a great way to give you a level of comfort that hopefully your security will increase as you move to the cloud through our cloud capabilities and remediations that already exist, and hopefully at the same time it'll increase your level of regulatory compliance. And that's why mapping over to the frameworks like NIST and ISO and other frameworks is so important for you to be able to understand, not just from a risk remediation standpoint, but from a regulatory standpoint, where you fall for that specific environment. So very excited about what we showed you today. I think it's a great benefit to you, and this has culminated from a lot of customer requests to us here at Oracle to help you better understand when you are looking to move to the cloud, what are the what are the gaps, additional security benefits, and regulatory concerns that need to be factored into that. And that's what we covered for you today. So with that, Curtis and I thank you for participating in the webcast. And again, if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to me, Ted Sherrill, ted.sherrill@oracle.com, or to Curtis Johnson at RiskWatch, curtis.johnson at riskwatch.com. So thank you very much, and we appreciate your participation.